one of the things that you have to embrace is speed, the ability to move without a lot of things in your way and focus on like what's most important. But I think to be able to have that as a startup and not have it feel like a chaotic dumpster fire all the time, you have to understand what the company goals are and what the mission is. And that way you can understand like when this change is made, like why we're making that change, and like very quickly make the move. If you don't like some semblance of dysfunction, like startups are probably not the best place for you.
Welcome everyone to another episode of First Principles. My name is Sarah and I'm the content lead for startups here at Rippling. Today, I'm really excited to have Cristina Cordova, COO at Linear, share some of her experiences and advice from scaling some of the most impressive GTM engines in Silicon Valley, including Stripe and Notion. If you're joining us for the first time, I'd like to officially welcome you to the First Principles community. We are a destination for founders and top startup operators who are rethinking the defaults, challenging assumptions, and building with conviction from day one. We feature exclusive interviews like this one today with Cristina on our YouTube and on Rippling Plus, share the most tactical bonus content in our weekly newsletter, and host exclusive founder events in cities like New York and San Francisco. A little bit more on our guest today. Cristina became a startup exec when she was just 22 years old. At 24, she was hired as employee number 28 at Stripe to run the partnerships team. There, she grew a global team from scratch. She personally helped win huge logos for the payment processor, like Lyft, and also spearheaded revenue partnerships with brands like Shopify. On the side, she's also a prolific angel investor and has a sixth sense for unicorns. She ended up joining one of her early investments, Notion, to scale its product-led growth strategy. Now she's COO at Linear, which she's also helped scale to another billion-dollar valuation, this time with a twist. The Finnish startup is laser-focused on craftsmanship and has invented a formula to grow their operations at scale without diluting the quality of their culture. Today, you'll get to hear my in-depth conversation with Cristina and the lessons she's learned from all three of these companies. She walks me through the time that Stripe decided to take the contact sales button off their website because too many people were asking for demos. She also shares why product crashes at Notion became one of the leading indicators of product market fit. But besides some terrific storytelling, Cristina also shares valuable tactics for how Linear is growing differently. Everything from collapsible org charts to unique hiring processes and a culture of rolling up your sleeves and getting it done. Whether you're a founder, an ops role, or a hiring manager at a startup, you're bound to take away something you can use tomorrow from Cristina's great advice. Let's get started.
Yes, I'm Cristina Cordova. I'm the COO at Linear. We're a purpose-built tool for planning and building products.
Well, you've had this remarkable journey yourself from Stripe, where you helped define GTM there and build out some key partnerships, to scaling Notion's product-led growth. And now you're at Linear and you've hit, I believe it's $1.225 billion valuation, with fewer than 80 people. And that's just pretty remarkable trajectory for anyone in tech. And I'm curious what drew you initially to Linear.
Yeah. So the way I actually discovered Linear for the first time was when I was at Stripe. Linear was one of my beta users on a product I was working on, actually. And one of the Linear founders, when we launched the product, tweeted out something nice about our product launch. And I appreciated it and was like, I'm going to follow this person on Twitter. And from there, I started to, of course, then get Linear news into my Twitter feed, and started following some other people from Linear, primarily because I thought they were thinking about building a company very differently from maybe what I had seen in my time at Stripe and at Notion previously, specifically wanting to really focus on like having small teams, hiring the best of the best, and keeping teams really nimble and able to kind of move on to the next challenge very quickly. And then at the same time, focusing on building a company that people want to be at for a very long period of time. And it was a philosophy that I really appreciated. And a lot of, the outcomes of that were, Linear was profitable, also still growing very fast, and also focused on being really intentional about what customers wanted and what they should build, and focused. And so all of those things to me were just, things that were really attractive in terms of company building. And if Linear could be successful and also do all those things and build a really great business at the same time, like I would love to be part of that. So when I was thinking about what I was going to do next, I just literally shot a DM to Linear CEO who I hadn't met. I'd met one of the other founders, and said, hey, like I really admire what you've built and would love to just have a chat sometime. And then, 5 months later, I was working at Linear. So.
Oh, very cool. I love the cold outreach approach of that as well. That sounds awesome. You kind of touched on this a little about how you were kind of drawn into like Linear's almost like philosophy and their early success.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if there was anything in that you spotted as you were like still checking the company out that was almost a direct contradiction of the playbooks you ran at either Stripe or Notion.
I would say, one thing for me was specifically quality as a value. And to be clear, like we didn't even have values as a company at the time. Like they were not like written down, but it was clear how much the company cared about this, even from the outside. And so for me, I thought a lot about, like initially you might go to like quality of the product, making sure it's like bug free and that it's very usable and also scales and it's fast and like all those things. But I also thought a lot about quality as it comes to customer experience specifically. So, there have been companies I've worked for in the past where, you write into support and it takes like 5 days for someone to get back to you, or the support is outsourced and the reply is like not helpful or useful. And then, you reply and then you have to wait another 4 or 5 days for like a real response or escalation or something like that. And one of the things when I saw that, they had like incredibly fast like support or response times, and it was something that they talked about as a company. And then when I ended up talking to the founders, they were maniacal about not wanting to outsource any support and wanting to kind of continue to kind of control the experience and make sure that it was very high quality for customers. And it was one of those things where you realize like, most companies are probably not going to like invest deeply in that experience because you often only find out how poor the support experience is at a company when you're already using the product, you're already a customer. So it's kind of at that point, like a little too late. Right. And like, are you going to switch to another product just because the support experience isn't so great? Right. So it just kind of like, dampens your feeling about the brand and about the company when that happens to you, even though you don't switch away. And I think for them, like the fact that it was just like so important. And I compared that to like experiences I had previously where, it wasn't as highly valued. That to me was like an indication of how much they value quality, and also understanding that like values are not something that only apply to certain aspects of the company and not to others, but actually should apply to everything as a whole. And so, for me, it was things like that where I was just like, oh yeah, like I've been at companies where they say they care about these things, but they don't really mean them. Or they only care about these things when it applies to certain aspects of the company and not in others. And to me, that's like an example of where I felt like I really want to be at a company that does that well. And like, I want that to be something that I care about. And that's something that everyone in the company cares about getting right. And, I hadn't seen that up until Linear at any of the companies I'd worked for.
And so I mentioned previously, I just like kind of threw out, the metrics about Linear's success and how fast they've grown and to what valuation and in a short time. But I think it's another thing to live it as you've done.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if you could almost take me back to maybe the first, what you would call like big milestone moment. Like, what do you think was the tipping point? Was it finding an early signal of product market fit? or something even more specific with working with customers. But I love to hear in your own words, like when you felt you were gaining that momentum for the first time.
Yeah. I feel like for me, it started to, I mean, of course, like there were elements of the business already having momentum before I joined, right? So kudos to everyone who was building linear before me, because there was a lot that went into it. Um, but upon joining, I think, similar to other companies I've been part of that have been product led growth oriented, started by selling a B2B product to like early stage startups, early stage companies. Linear was pretty similar. And I think, in all of these companies, the moment for me of like, oh, wow, like this is really exciting is when you have like your first like very large public company switch over to your product, and then you start to see like the opportunity that's ahead for the business, in like, growth, mid-market and enterprise companies going forward, and knowing that this is just like the first of what could be many many businesses who get to take advantage of your product, who historically would have said like, oh, like, linear is for startups, or stripe is for startups, or whatever. But that big first deal, I think is huge for a company, and I think puts a lot of like faith and trust into the fact that you're doing things right, and it's like naturally leading to that growth into other segments in the market. Because I think as a startup, you should intentionally be very focused, right? So for linear, it's like initially it was like finding that little wedge within like early stage companies, right? And then over time, like growing and growing and growing. And then, you get your first like big public company deal. And then, recently we had our first like Fortune 20 deal. And so it gets like bigger and bigger. And those all really pile on to make you feel like, okay, this is really working, and our message is resonating with the right people. So yeah.
And then I think within that crux of, like you said, what comes next, like after that tipping point moment, and then you really get to start, I guess that's the exciting part at the start of when you hit that magical point, starting to scale. Is my impression that's kind of where your role shines, especially like in ops and kind of molding the organization. I'm curious, since that particular moment, like what specific organizational choices, maybe
Yeah.
one or two, have you made that you think have just like really helped Linear keep itself so lean and continue to scale?
Yes. I would say, organizationally, one of the things we have done since the beginning of the company has been to have these, very small, high leverage teams that are highly autonomous. And I think that really forces like clarity of ownership, reduces a lot of coordination overhead, and ensures that people are seeing a lot of their direct impact. So I've seen that at other companies, but I think seeing that again here is great. But the thing I haven't seen at other companies, is having collapsible product and eng teams. So, there's a big new initiative in the company. We spin up a team of engineers, product design, et cetera, to work on that particular area. And once that is shipped out the door in maintenance mode, that team spins down and goes off to work on other things. So as like an engineer or designer, you get to work on the full product surface area. And also you get to work on things that are by definition, because we're choosing to spin up a new project and start working on something, very important. Whereas I think at a lot of other companies, you can get very quickly into like a team with like a pretty narrow scope of work. And then you're just focused on the highest priority things within that scope of work. And for linear, it's like, no, like this product surface area may not need any more attention. Like we have most of what we need here, but actually we need to go build this whole new thing in this new area. And so, instead we're going to apply our resources to the things that we're, ultimately in the most need. And so that is very unique. I think at a lot of other companies, you are on the product platform team or something like that, and then you're on that team for 2 years until you like move on to a different team or something like that. And I think in reality, like most early stage companies like don't really have a good idea of like how organizational structures should work. And that ends up forcing like basically a lot of reorgs. Like I've been through so many reorgs in my time working at startups. And in reality, it's like it's almost like every time we spin up a new team and spin down a team on a project within engineering product design, it's almost like you're having like a mini reorg. But you don't have to call it that. It's not dramatic. You're just moving on to the next thing that is highest priority for the company. So I think that like nimble and lightweight like organizational structure and way of choosing work to get done is really critical to our success.
Yeah, I'm curious how you landed on that decision with the product engineering design teams. Were they a part of those conversations from the beginning when you were discussing like how to organize it? Or like was it something that worked for someone else previously?
Yeah. I think it really came from our founders, like first and foremost, just being like, let's stay nimble. Like, why do we have to call this a particular team or a thing? Right. We designate our teams by geography. So like half our engineering team roughly is in Europe and half our team is in the US. And so, you work with other people in the US as a US engineer, and the same would be true as an EU engineer. And that's purely just because we want you to be working with people in the same time zone. So like that makes sense as like a team, right? But outside of that construct, like I think it's very much like a founder-led first principles approach to saying like, we don't know what our most important priorities are going to be in 6 months. So why should we organize like our team like as if we will or would know what those priorities are necessarily going to be? And the easiest way I think to remain nimble and like react to user needs and the market and what we're being pulled to do is to kind of operate in this way. So
Yeah, that kind of segues into a point I'm interested in exploring around like just the dysfunction of startups, because I think a healthy dose of it can be a great thing, and too much, obviously, like you said, can get chaotic. Yeah, what's your stance on dysfunction being productive or not, and how do you think leaning into that at Linear has actually made you guys faster?
Yes. I would say, like, I guess, like, if you don't like some semblance of dysfunction, like, startups are probably not the best place for you. So that's certainly a part of it. I think I like really enjoy it though. Like I like that, one of our founders earlier today was like, I feel like our priorities are not in the right place. And like when it comes to like hiring, for example, and we should just like switch gears and, focus on these roles. And, the leaders of the parts of the company where, they're going to be getting less resources are like, okay, I'm on board. I'll take on more of the work myself. And you just like shuffle, right? And you think about how that type of change would happen at a very large company. And it's like, oh, we're going to come up with some documentation. We're going to have a meeting. There's going to be an all hands. We're going to record it. We're going to make sure everyone's on board. We're going to go around to all the teams and make sure, right? Like there's just like so much like socialization of like what needs to happen and why. And one of the things I appreciate most in a startup and like maybe why it can seem very chaotic is that you can shift priorities very quickly, which means like what you're working on right now, someone might say tomorrow, actually, that's not the most important thing you should be doing. And instead we're going to work on this. And I think for a lot of people, that's like difficult, right? To feel like, oh, am I working on something? Like, am I working on the right thing? But I think as someone who works in early stage startups, like that's a very normal thing, right? And we shouldn't keep doing something that's not a priority just because you started on it. Right. So I think one of the things that that you have to embrace is speed, the ability to move without a lot of things in your way, and focus on like what's most important. But I think to be able to have that as a startup, and not have it feel like a chaotic dumpster fire all the time, you have to understand what the company goals are and what the mission is. And that way you can understand like when this change is made, like why we're making that change, and like very quickly make the move. Because the alternative is that you have no idea like what our vision is, what our goals are, and all of these changes are happening and you have no idea why. And so you're just like moving along with emotions, trying to keep things going because someone told you to. And I actually think the best startups are startups where people are very empowered. So even if direction comes down, that says priorities need to change, oh, this is chaotic, right? Like you understand why the priorities are changing, and you can respect that the company has to make a move quickly and that you're gonna, get on board with it. So those are the elements that I think can make it feel like an exciting, type of journey, and something that you can learn from as an employee versus making it feel like, this is crazy and you can't handle it. And, there's no rhyme or reason to what a company is doing.
Totally. Yeah. And going one step even further, I think there's almost like a crossroads where I think, like you said, founders and those who work at startups expect some sort of, there is the chaos and the changing of priorities very quickly, and they're happy to embrace it as well. But how can they tell if something is like a good, normal growing pain versus something like more actually dysfunctional?
I mean, it's funny because like when I was at Stripe, the API was going down like a lot. And if the API goes down, that means like our customers can't process transactions, their customers can't pay them. Not good, right? Core function is like high uptime. But it was also a signal that we were scaling, right? Like there was a period of time when we would go down a lot and like no one would write in about it because we didn't really have that many customers, right? Like, so it's almost like when people notice that you're down, it's like, oh, people really care about us. People care about our product. Like, how exciting is that, right? So like you can turn it into like a little bit of a positive that like, oh, people really care about us now. And then also like we needed to do something to fix this, right? And it took a long time to get to a period where we had high uptime for our API. And it was very stable for like a long period of time. And there was a lot of effort put into that as a company. We had something at Stripe called Code Yellow. And it was basically like, if this is a big important initiative and it's a priority, it's a code yellow. Right. And I think it's really important to be like, oh, this is important. And that's like a signifier of it in a way. When I went to Notion, we had a very similar situation happen where the product was going down. Like we were scaling a lot of customers were coming in to use the product, and the product was going down. And, at this time I'm like, I'm an old timer. Like I've been at startups for a while. And so people come to me and they're like, Cristina, like, should we be worried? Like, should I start looking for a new job? Like, if we can't keep the service up and stuff like that. And I was like, like this is a good sign. Like this happened at Stripe. It's happened at a lot of really fantastic companies that like, have to figure out how to scale while meeting the current demand of the product. And, the reality is that you don't build the perfectly scaled systems from the beginning most of the time, right? Because you're not anticipating that amount of traffic, that amount of users, all that kind of stuff. And you have to build it later, like after the users are already there. And so it's a normal thing. And we should go about fixing it and prioritizing it. If we don't fix this in the next like X many months, then I would say we have a serious problem on our hands. But, this is a normal thing. And in some ways, it's also a good thing because it reflects that people really care about our product, that a lot of people are actually using our product. And that's a good thing. But I think sometimes like it comes from experience, which, I hate saying in startups because I feel like so many of us are like walking around with like no experience, and just trying to like manage things. But I think one thing that can be really helpful, and I advise people to do this all the time, is like when you feel like you're going through a tough challenge at a startup, just going and talking to other people at other companies. And it's something that Stripe did. It's like, let's go talk to all the best infrastructure leaders in the world. Like, we can get a connection, to these people and take them out for a coffee and learn how they scaled. Like obviously like Facebook had to scale really quickly, like straight out of like Mark Zuckerberg's dorm room. Like companies have had to do these things before. And we should go find the people who worked on those problems and see what they learned. So that as we're trying to fix this problem for the first time, because none of us have done this before, that we really understand what their lessons were and don't repeat the same mistakes. Right. So it's something I always encourage. I think when you're going through a challenge is like, you're probably not the first ever company to have gone through this problem. Right. So you should go talk to companies that have gone through it and see, what you can do to make it better.
Right. Yeah, it's great advice. And I like how tactical that is as well. Do you want to switch gears slightly and jump into hiring as a topic? Kind of again around this idea that if I find it so impressive that Linear has been able to stay so lean and nimble, and you kind of shared organizationally how that's happened. But I'm also curious, like, what the hiring strategy has been, particularly, is there a framework you rely on to decide when you're truly desperate enough to hire?
Oh God. Yeah. Um, to me, it's really like when I feel like there's a bottleneck, or when I feel like a role is going to be almost like 150%, like of a normal person's like plate. Like, do I say like, okay, we should probably hire someone for this? So for example, we're hiring an enterprise marketer right now. And we have a few marketers on our team already. And I think I try to be really strategic about when we make hires. I think we've only made one other marketing hire this year. So, kind of really focusing on what we really truly need. But, I looked around and I was talking to our sales team, and our sales team doesn't have like competitive collateral for companies, with thousands of employees that are in our enterprise market. And so there's just a lot that we don't have. And I was looking around at our team and I was like, who could I assign this work to? And I was like, everyone's working on really important things that I don't want them to not be working on so that they can work on this stuff, And so that was like probably the first moment where I was like, okay, like, should we do this? And then my next inclination is like, can I do it? Like, like, are there things I can do, like putting on my individual contributor hat, just to fill a short-term gap? Or is this a longer term, priority for the company? Like, are we going to continue to have these kinds of things come up, and this kind of work is going to continuously need to be done? Then you start to say, okay, this isn't just like a, Cristina writes a customer story and then we go back to like our normal like work. Like, I need to spend a lot of time on something in order to get it right. And we're going to need to continue to iterate on it for months or maybe years. And to me, that's like when you start to say, this probably is a full-time hire and we should find someone who can do it. And then I think you start to look at the team that you have today, and you start to look for like, what shape of person? Like, do I want a person shaped with like the kind of experience and skills that this person on our team brings to the table? Or do I want something maybe that we don't have on our team today? Right. Because I think if you're looking for the latter, it's going to be harder to find because you don't necessarily know what it looks like because you don't have it. And especially if I've never worked with like, I'm like confirming, like an enterprise marketer before. And so I've never hired for it. Right. And I'm going to be doing this from scratch. So there's not like a network that I can pull from of like really great people in this role, people that I've worked with before, et cetera. So it's going to be a longer search. So when I know that's going to be the case, that it's kind of like a first of a kind role, new skill set, And then also we don't necessarily have the network for it. I'm also more cognizant that I need to both do research on like who are just great people in this role and how can I go talk to them. Not necessarily to hire them, but just to learn about their job and what they do and how like enterprise marketing at like company X is going to be different for how it is at Linear. And then second, start to build a network and get recommendations of people, and know that this is going to be like a longer search because it's going to be the first time that we've made a hire like that. So those are the things that I think are like most important, I would say. And, you know, I really try to like not make a hire unless it starts to feel like we are unable to accomplish things that we should accomplish. Or there's like clearly a long-term effort that is going to need like sustained support, and a particular skill set in order to accomplish it.
Yeah, I do want to come back to the point, especially if you interviewing folks who are in the role currently, because I just think that it's rare and it's also like super tactical way of thinking about it. But before we move on, I something struck me of you said about you having kind of enough context and knowledge to know what all the individuals on your team are working on, enough to know that like you don't want to move them around onto different projects.
Yeah.
And that kind of tells me that you have such a clear line of sight really into every team and into every function. And I'm curious if you had just any techniques you think worked there on how you've been able to kind of manage that have worked well.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's easier when I'm wearing my like functional manager hat, right? Like there are some functions where I'm managing like a leader who's leading that function. And then there are other functions where I'm like managing the team directly. So in marketing, I like manage our marketing team directly. So I'm like very close to their work because I'm their manager. Like we have one-on-ones. They talk to me about their work, right? So I have a really good sense of that. And I think like as a manager, you always should. Like there shouldn't be anyone on your team where you're like, I wonder what they're doing. Like, what's that person working on these days? Because then, I think you're probably not using your people in the wisest way. And it also allows people to like coast. And it's just like, we do not have enough time for people to coast, right? And we don't have enough roles for people to do that. So I think like understanding what your team is doing is really important, to be in the weeds. I think also having done some of the work that your team is doing is also really helpful. Like, before I found a person to write customer stories at Linear, I wrote the customer stories. And so like, I know what it's like. I know that it takes a really long time to get the customer to approve the story, like every time, even though you think like, oh, this is a slam dunk. They're going to approve it so quick. It's beautiful, and then here we are waiting 6 weeks for literally someone on their comms team to say yes to us. So it's just like, you've done it and you know that some of these things like take time. So when someone's telling me like, this is taking a long time, like I know that it's going to take a long time from experience. Not just because they're telling me it's taking a long time. So I also think that helps you get the best out of people and know when something is taking a long time for a legitimate reason or because someone is like stuck and like they don't want to tell you why they're stuck, right? Or for some other reason, you'll have to figure that out. But like I think that helps to understand like where you want to dig in and like really understand what's going on and like why is this taking so long versus where you want to say like, okay, like I trust you here. Like I know that takes a long time. So I think those are parts of it. I think when you're managing functional leaders and there are people on their team that you don't know as well, right? I've pretty much been involved in every hiring process for every like business go-to-market person at Linear. So, like everyone has worked with me in some capacity, right? And I think like, again, starting to figure out ways where you can skip the manager level and go one down below to understand like what is the actual work being done. So best example of this is probably our sales team. So we have a head of sales. He manages the team, obviously, but there are a lot of deals where, I'm getting escalations about a certain deal. I'm talking to an executive at a particular company and they're considering Linear. And, I'm having an executive conversation with someone at their company, and we're doing account mapping and all those things. And so I get to work with individual AEs on specific sales deals. And I get to like see their work and, understand it a little bit more closely, and also understand like where we can make improvements. So like, I think for every team as a leader, even if you're not like managing the team directly, just really trying to get into the weeds of the work and understand like, is this a high performing team or not? Because I don't think you can trust it purely, in the sales world, for example. Like, I can't trust just because we hit our number that our team is doing great. Like, hitting the number is like one of many things that we have to do. So, I think understanding more of that like has to come from like digging in a little bit deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you kind of brought up numbers, I mean, it's definitely a balance, right? And I'm curious what you track in terms of performance across your teams, especially in this kind of like high pressure environment that Linear is building in. Like you said, you're keeping yourself lean and nimble. So what metrics are you actually tracking across the teams, like that you find actually matter?
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of metrics don't matter. Well, like I joined Linear and we were like not a very like data driven, metrics driven like company, and one of my first hires was a data hire, right? Because what I didn't want to do was like bother an engineer who should be building something and be like, hey, like, don't you think we should have a dashboard with these metrics? Like we should just have a data person with a specialized skill set, right? So when I joined, I first started with like the obvious things to me that I could do on my own, which were ultimately like revenue metrics. So really trying to understand at a high level, like, okay, what is our ARR or MRR, whatever kind of matters to you? What's our new MRR every month? Like, what are we bringing into the business? Like, what's our churn? What's our contraction? What's our expansion? What are we ending the month at? What's our month over month percentage growth? And those are, I would say, like from a pure revenue perspective, like most of the things I care about. And if you were to say only pick one of those things, it would be the percentage month over month revenue growth. Like that's really all that matters. Like you have to be growing at a certain speed to be a valuable company. So like that's like really your month over month growth is what matters most. And then you can kind of go into the details of like, okay, well, how many customers do we have? How fast is like our customer growth growing, right? Those kinds of things I think you can get into a little bit deeper. What's like the average price that your, customers are paying? Is your average price moving up over time, right? Like those are things you can look into, but generally when I'm like, there's a dashboard I check pretty much every single day when I start my work, just to kind of see how things are going. And it's basically month over month revenue growth. And then like, are we tracking to, on a daily basis, are we tracking to like our target for the month effectively? Weekly active users, because I want like the number of people in the product day to day, regardless of revenue, to be growing. And then new workspaces, which is basically like our version of like new users. It's like new companies using Linear. And I want that to be growing at a certain pace as well. Because in order to grow the business as a whole, like more and more people need to be signing up for Linear and trying Linear. And like those are the most important things. And nothing else really matters that much. Or you could look at like a lot less frequently if there's a particular like problem you want to zero in on for the business.
Right. Yeah, especially I think it's relevant to when thinking about possibly more like external pressures on the business. And like I'm thinking in particular, like board members or just or perhaps there's like another external pressure from like customers.
Yeah.
And when you receive that pressure from them around, maybe it's metrics, maybe it's hiring.
Yeah.
Because they kind of come up like how have you navigated pushing back on that? And how do you push back on that at Linear in particular?
Yeah. I think a very common board push is always just like more, right? Like oh, so you're growing, X percentage month over month, or you're going to hit this ARR goal. Like, why not more? Right? Or, oh, you're going to hire 100 people this year. Why not more? Right? Like that is like the common push. And I actually think that's like a perfectly fine push. Like, shouldn't you always want to like push people's ambitions forward, and get more out of like even what they think they can do? Right. And ever since I've been at Linear, like last year and this year, like we're going to grow faster, than we thought we would. Right. So maybe they're right that we, should have even bigger like ambitions for ourselves. I think on the hiring front though, sometimes, the ambition is to like meet a moment. So for example, when I was at Stripe, we had to take the contact sales button off the website because there were so many people contacting us and we couldn't get back to them. So it was a worse experience if you reached out to us, because we said contact sales, right? And we never responded to you rather than just like deleting the button from our website so that you didn't have a way to contact us. So that's what we did. We were like, we're going to get rid of this button. And that way fewer people will reach out to us. And, it worked, but we still had a lot of people reaching out to us, and writing into like, sales@stripe.com or something like that. Anyway. So, we couldn't prevent it all. And a reasonable person would say, hey, like, do you have enough salespeople to meet the moment, right? To meet the number of people who are reaching out to you and like want to use your product? And the answer to that question at that time would have been no. Right. And a reasonable person would say, yeah, we probably should have a bigger team. And if you extrapolate the numbers and you say, for how many people are reaching out to us and how big our business is growing, like we should be, X size and we're half of X. Right. And so then the question is like, how do you get there? Right. And I think sometimes for certain companies, it's just about putting butts in seats. And, it's just like, do you fill the minimum requirements for this role? Okay, great. We will hire you because, that's what we need to do. And, for salespeople, for example, maybe what you do is you say, okay, like we're going to hire all of these people. We're going to hire maybe 25% even more than we need. And anyone who isn't good enough, not meeting quota by 6 months, we're just going to fire them. Right. A lot of companies do this. Right. That is an approach you can take. We take a very different approach in talent and in hiring. We have a much longer recruiting process. We do work trials as part of our recruiting process. So like instead of an on-site interview that lasts like 4 to 5 hours, you'll spend anywhere from 2 to 5 days with us paid working on a project, so that we can work and collaborate with you and understand if you're the right fit for Linear. We do that across every single role. And that means our hiring process is longer. That means sometimes candidates drop out because, they have an offer in hand and it's just easy to accept it versus like waiting around to, do their work trial at Linear. But we think it matters more that we hire the best people and that we have a really high bar for hiring. And we've always leaned into patience over pressure. And that includes pressure like from the board. And pressure from ourselves. Like we want to be hiring faster too, right? It's really mutual. But sometimes I find that investors can often say like, you should have this hire right now. Like, why don't you have this hire? And it's like, we just haven't found the hire that's the right fit for us. And we're not going to make that hire, until we find the right person for that role. Right. And I think a lot of that is because we need to make we need to understand what our values are as a company, and cultural dilution is much harder to undo than slower short-term progress. Like, yes, we're going to build fewer things and we're not going to ship as many things because we don't have as many engineers. But the alternative is that we like dilute the culture and hire a bunch of people who aren't very good and we build products that suck. So I think you have to push back with saying like, you need to understand what our values are and what we care about and why we're optimizing for having a really high hiring bar versus just wanting to put butts in seats. And so, I think that's the best way to push back where, you're fundamentally on the same page, like in a lot of ways, right? It's like, yeah, we both want to hire, but like, these are the things we're going to prioritize, and we're not going to hire just because you really want us to hire,
Well, I think that kind of dovetails nicely with some closing thoughts I had, just like you said, around Linear's particular culture on craft, prioritizing craft, like you said, patience over pressure. And now that you've been like at several startups and several different companies that have grown, looking ahead, do you think more companies will adopt this sort of approach that Linear's taking? Do you think it will remain unique?
I think so. Yeah. Um, you know, I think our founders were smart to really do this even in 2021 when everyone was hiring like crazy. During COVID, and really saying like, why? Like, do you want us to hire a bunch of people that like aren't very good? Like, no. Like, if the most amazing 20 engineers came to us tomorrow and were like, we want to join Linear, like, would we hire them? Yes, right. So I think that's possible, but unlikely, right? So I think for us, when we think about like our values and what we care about and what we're doing, it's important that everyone kind of understands like what the focus is, and if what you want to build is like these very well crafted products, and culturally we want to do that with really small high leverage teams, and that means that like, well, we have to have a high bar for hiring. Those are all part of our culture in a way, but that doesn't mean that we have to be slow when we could be fast, right? So like, I think we have to resist like sometimes the complacency that can sometimes happen when, as a company, you've said like, well, this is just like part of our culture, or this is part of what we do. But you see companies now like Cursor, $10 billion valuation with 60 people, right? I think a signal for how efficient you are as a business is like, the amount of revenue per employee that you have on your team, right? So things like that, I think, can be really good signals as to like, do we really need all these people? Like, just because Stripe of today is 10,000 people doesn't mean Linear has to shoot for being 10,000 people, right? Like, we sell a different product to a different market at a different point in time, and we should strive to build a product where a lot of people don't have to reach out to sales; they can self-serve, where they don't have to reach out to support because our product is so good. Right? Like, we should strive for that. It's not going to happen for everybody for everything, right? But like, if we can have a lean team, like, we should really try to do that. And it goes along with the philosophy of so many other things that we're doing, that I think there are a lot of companies out there that will potentially take this approach if they see that it's possible and it's working. Because like, Stripe can't have a really tiny team when, you can't respond to your inbound sales requests. Like, yeah, you're going to have to blow up your sales team. Like, that's what you're going to have to do. Right. But if you have a business model where a self-serve model can get most of your customers on board, then you actually don't have to have a huge sales team. Right. But it really depends on your business model and like what you're capable of. Like Cursor and Linear and all of these other companies are selling to primarily technical customers who like to read the manual, don't want to talk to sales teams, like, all of these things. So we're in a very unique place where we might be able to try a different style of business model and approach that hasn't necessarily been done to great scale before. So at the same time, like, maybe we change our mind on a lot of things along the way, and we're open to that too.
Yeah. Oh, that's such interesting food for thought. And I think my last question really is kind of on that word culture. that's
Yeah.
often like so squishy to pin down. And like you said, like it's not just saying like, oh, you have to like make sure your culture prioritizes craft. I am curious if there is, you think, one special thing that like bonds the team at Linear that like makes the culture what it is.
Maybe to me, it's probably like a default to trust and transparency. Um, we share a lot of context widely so people can make like fast, independent decisions, which to me means like there's fewer approvals, more speed, higher accountability. And a lot of people who've gone to a place where there's like a lot of red tape and then they come to Linear are like, this is so refreshing, right? But the other aspect of the trust and transparency is that there's also a lot of directness in that. Our founders are Finnish. They're very direct by culture. Like that's their culture, right? And they have instilled it into Linear's culture. So we've all learned to be that way. So at other companies where you might beat around the bush and it might take longer to like get to a decision, it's like, no. At Linear, we're like working remotely. We're operating asynchronously. We're trying to move fast. Like you got to be direct. There's just no other way to be successful if you're not going to be. So I think those elements, I think, make us a very unique culture that you walk into and you're like, oh, wow, like people are really like saying the thing that maybe at other companies you wouldn't say. But I think it cuts through a lot of things. And I really enjoy it.
Oh, awesome. Well said. Well, before I had stopped on the recording, I just wanted to ask if there was anything you thought of, like as we were speaking, that you wanted to add that I didn't touch on, especially, I guess, getting across the story of kind of Linear's scale at the size it's currently at.
Yes, I should probably do that.
No worries if not.
No, I'm happy to. Okay. I would say for us, we're a business with, 15,000 companies using our product. We're growing faster in 2025 than we were in 2024. And in 2024, we grew faster than the year before. It's a very like unusual business in a lot of ways because all of those things are true. And we're also profitable and we're more profitable than we've ever been. And I think for us, a lot of what we've learned about building a company is that you can do it in a very unique way and still have a very successful business if what you're doing is very oriented to the culture of your team and the principles that you hold dearly. And so, it's possible a lot of the ways that we do things right now, aren't going to scale or aren't going to work at 500 people or 1,000 people or what have you. But I can promise you that when we do get to that stage, like we will do a version that feels very much like the linear scaling version of that to get to the next stage of growth. And I think it's really important for founders and for company leaders to try and hold on to like what makes them unique and what enables them to build a strong business at the same time.